Hello, folks. So we're here a few minutes early because, as I said in the little chat there, we want to, in case there's a good few people joining, we want to make sure everybody can get in on time. So I'm going to be starting at 4 o'clock. But in the meantime, I have the chat open here beside me. If you see me looking to the side quite a lot, so if you have any questions or anything you'd like to throw at me now in the next 10 minutes before we get into the actual work of the class, go ahead. I'm happy. I can see we already have one person who was in thinking we were doing junior cycle. So this is Leaving Cert today, Leaving Cert higher level preparation. I'm going to give you a look around the platform. I'm going to show you the books, and I'm going to do a bit of work on Heaney and then a bit of work on Macbeth, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. So while I'm waiting to get going, I have the chat open, and if anybody's any questions, you can ask me straight away. Now we're straight away. We got a couple of questions. So as I said, I'm going to get into the work from 4 o'clock, but I'm happy to answer questions in the meantime. So Sophie, if you haven't finished Macbeth, Sophie, well, here's the thing, Sophie, right? You're not studying Macbeth as a text that you're enjoying as a piece of entertainment. It's an academic exercise. So really, absolutely, the analysis that we're going to look at today, it's not going to give away the end necessarily, but really you should already know what happens at the end of the play before you even get, begin it. You should have an overview before you start drilling down into it. So it's up to you. There might be a spoiler or two, all right, in today's second half of today's class, but it's up to you. But if you're wondering, will you understand what's going on in this class, if you haven't finished Macbeth? My confident assertion would be yes, you certainly will. And if you don't, you can ask me questions. It's always good. Um, 4 poems per poetry answer. Ava, it's a perennial question. There are teachers out there who say three will do. In my experience, students who write about 3 poems, and again, maybe at the very, very top end, you might get students who can write about 3 poems in extraordinary detail and give sufficient analysis. But for the vast majority of students, 4 is a good number. In fact, for me, the most satisfying poetry essays are ones where students demonstrate a really good, detailed understanding of a kind of variety of poems, and they can look at 4, 5, even 6 poems. But the crucial thing is you're not summarizing it. I'll get into all this not today, but as the year goes on. But you're not summarizing the poems. You're not telling me the story of the poems. You're interacting with the question, and you're demonstrating knowledge of the poems in that interaction. So if that's too complicated an answer, welcome to Paul's world. Um, Olivia, comparative studies begins in a couple of weeks' time in the Wednesday evening classes. I'm going to talk about the classes, but we're going to be looking at comparative studies intermittently throughout the year. I'm going to break it up into different sections where we look at the three modes. I'll be doing general vision and viewpoint first, and then I'll be moving into the other two modes. Um, I'll have looked at all three modes, but certainly by the time the mocks come around, and when we get into the platform in a couple of minutes and I start showing you the platform, I'll show you where there's already loads of material. The great thing about this platform, guys, is that you don't have to wait for the teacher to do stuff in classes. Obviously, the live classes are of value, and students, I think, like the back and forth of the live classes. But the fact is that the vast majority of the material that you need is already on the platform for you, and you can take an a la carte approach and kind of dive in and start looking at material straight away. Hope that answers your question, Olivia. Ahmed, how long's a piece of string? You need to demonstrate knowledge of the poems. I would always suggest to my students, because I have some students who are doing higher level and aiming for H1s, and I have some students who are doing a higher level and are hoping to get a H5. There are different aims for each individual student. The more thorough your knowledge of the poem, the more likely you're going to produce an interesting piece of analysis. My rule of thumb is usually my students would learn 2 to 3 quotes per poem, but once again, it's not as simple as that. You can learn all the quotes you like. If you don't know what they mean, if you don't know how they allow you to talk about the poet's style of writing, if you don't understand that maybe they contain a technique that might be something you could comment on, well then really it's no use learning the quotes. So how many you learn? As many as possible, but from a knowledgeable, not a rote learned way. And by that I mean that you know what the quote means, and you know how to comment on the poet's use of language through that quote, rather than just writing it down and saying, hey, look at me, I can learn things by rote. No problem, Sophie. Thanks for being nice. Well, this last be first half, second half Macbeth. Yeah, Moya. So the plan is I'm going to go for 2 to 2.5 hours. The first hour, I'm going to spend about 15 minutes doing a kind of a tour of the platform and showing you some of the English stuff on the platform. Then I'm going to get into just a brief overview of Heaney. I'm not teaching you Heaney today, but I'm going to have a look at Heaney and show you the stuff that's in the book, and talk about how I approach the teaching of poetry. Then we'll take about a 5-minute break, somewhere around 5 o'clock. We'll come back. I'm going to do about 45 minutes, 50 minutes of Macbeth, looking at past exam questions, and again giving you an insight into the way I teach the play. And then we're going to finish up about 10 to 6 by opening the chat up for questions, and I'll stay on the call for as long as I need to until 6:30 to answer whatever questions come on. That's a great question, August. Questions. The English Leaving Cert course changes every year. So while I get great pleasure in my life from reading the poems that are prescribed and reading the comparative texts that are prescribed, and I read every single one of them, and I study every single film. I don't just do 3, I do all 36 every single year. While the experience of doing that is enriching for me, the fact is that there's a reason why they can change things every year. And the reason is because they're not examining you on those texts, they're examining you through those texts. The most important thing you need to get into your head, August, is the sense that this exam is going to reward you if you are organized, yes, and you've done the study, yes, but also if you've practiced your critical thinking skills. We're going to start in a couple of minutes by looking at the questions that were asked on studied poetry last year. And there was 3 questions that were properly tricky, 1 that was okay, and 1 that was straightforward. The vast majority of students don't think about the critical thinking needed to answer the question. So looking at past questions and thinking about having a good approach to answering those questions, I think that's key. And if that's too broad an answer, again, we've got a whole year to work together if you join me on this journey. Emily, again, great question. Now, guys, I'm gonna close off the chat now in just 2 minutes. So, Grace, we leave it open for a minute or 2 more, please, Grace, and then we'll close it off and I'll get into the work. But I'm going to answer these couple of questions that are here. It depends on the question, Emily. Famously, there was a question in, I think it was 2022. I could be wrong. It could be 2023. It was on the poet William Wordsworth, and the statement in the question, the stimulus statement in the question, stated that that his work is the language was outdated, and thematically the work has little to say, or nothing to say to a modern audience. That was the general wording. Now, that was clearly a question that was designed to stimulate a contrarian response, because anybody who knows Wordsworth's poetry knows that while artificially the language might sound slightly old-fashioned, the use of metaphor, the use of symbolism, his ability to create rhythm, there's a timeless quality to his language. And in the same way, the thematic concerns that Wordsworth addresses in his poetry are universal, and universal again means relevant, no matter where you are or when you are. So that's a rare example of a question that was designed to elicit a contrarian response. Generally, the statements in the question are pretty straightforward and you agree with them. I think that's the easiest thing to do. But the examiner doesn't have a, it's not like maths where maths is probably a bad example because I know there's loads of ways to get to the answer in maths, but it's not like other subjects where there's a right answer and a wrong answer. What we're looking for in your work is evidence of learning and evidence of critical thinking. And if you can give me an original response, hallelujah, I love you, as long as you can support the points you're making with evidence. Now, Diana, we start Macbeth sometime after 5 o'clock. Well, Juliet, if you struggle with learning quotes, you're going to have to, grasp that nettle early doors. There is no easy solution. I know one of the things that I've done over the years is I use my phone and I sometimes listen back to poems that I'm going to be teaching that day when I'm on my bicycle on the way into work. And listening to the lyrics of a song, often the lyrics get stuck in your head without even trying to learn them. And one of the ways that students, in my experience, have overcome the issue with learning quotes is to keep them nice and short. I think the most important thing as well is that you understand what the quote means. I think often students can't remember quotes because they actually don't understand what they mean. So they might as well just be learning a series of phonetic phrases. So understanding what they mean, and sometimes it might be useful to use the technology to listen back to the quotes. But you need to start early. And like everything else, if you work rigorously and if you work incrementally, in other words, you do a little bit every day, 5 minutes a day, you'll find yourself building that knowledge. Now, so I'm going to ask Grace, if you wouldn't mind now, we'll close the chat off. I'll finish with a couple of questions that are there, and then I'm going to get into the work. And guys, don't worry, I'm going to open the chat again at the end of the first hour. And then when we take a break, and when I come back after the break, grabbing my second cup of coffee of the day, or the third one it'll be, I'll answer a few questions then. We'll close the chat again for the second half of the class and open it then at the end, as I said. That's great. Thanks a million, Grace. I really appreciate it. So, Diana already answered the question. Oh, I can't see those rest of those questions now. That's okay. That's no problem. So I'll have a look at the rest of those questions when I ask Grace to switch the chat on in the second, at the end of the first half of the class. So, hello, it is 4 minutes past 4. My name is Paul McCormick. Welcome to this class. I hope you're all very well. I know quite a number of you were at the higher options this week. I believe it was a bit of crack. I was chatting to a few people who were there, both students and colleagues. And really, really, really pleased to have you join me here today. And I hope you find the work that we're going to do today useful. Now, so I'm going to talk you through, first of all, the platform. And I'm going to take about 10 minutes to walk you through, to show you some of the stuff that we have before I get into looking at the work. So this is the platform. It really is. I think it's great. If you haven't got a copy of the book, if you're joining and you haven't been at higher options, you can see the news feed there. There's a lovely photograph of me looking a bit shabby. Not too happy with that. Anyway, maybe that's what I do look like. If you haven't got a copy of the book, the notes that I'm going to be using in class today, which is the entire, that actually says book 1. It's actually, it changed name. It's book 2 now. But anyway, the notes I'm using today on poetry and on Macbeth are there. You can see them, and all you have to do is click on them and they will automatically download onto your device. Okay. So if you were to join me as a student of Grind 360, you'd see me well, it's up to you, but I have a live class every Sunday and every Wednesday. The live class on both evenings begins at 8:15 and goes up to, well, around 9:30, 9:45. And paper 1 is Wednesday and paper 2 is Wednesday. Okay. And I try to cover everything as thoroughly as I can. while always cognizant of the fact that English is a very subjective area of study, that I will be doing things sometimes that you're not covering in school. Poets you're not covering might be looking at text that you're not necessarily covering, or might be working on how to write a speech and you're not doing speech writing. But the great thing about this platform is, you, as I said a few minutes ago, if you were on the call, you really do have huge amount of options if you go onto the platform. So we go into English sixth year, and you'll see the amount of material that's there for you. So if you were to join this week and you've missed the first 3 weeks, there's the first 3 weeks of the paper 1 class and the first 3 weeks of the paper 2 class. No problem catching up. This is where you get your notes. Every week there will be notes provided on the platform, as well as, now that the books will be rolled out in the next week, I'll be working with the books, but there will be notes provided every week as well, and that's where you will access them. Then breakdown of video content on paper 1. On the language genres, a breakdown of the 2024 paper 1. I'm working on the 2025 one in live classes at the moment. And then we get to the comparative. Now, so if you're studying the comparative and maybe you're not too sure what you need to know from each of your comparative texts, what I do is I create a document on each text. So have a look here. So there's the Underground Railroad, All the Light We Cannot See, Diego Maradona, The Crucible, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. And it is my guarantee to you that no matter what text you're studying or combination of text you're studying for your Leaving Cert, that you will have a detailed note which will have commentary on the different comparative modes, and also commentary on the key quotes and key moments from the comparative texts, and it will be there for you to download as part of your membership of Grinds 360. I also have plenty of video content on how to write comparative essays, and in the live classes then I won't be teaching particular comparative texts, but I'll say the week before I do a comparative class on the live class, I'll say, okay guys, shout out the names of 6 texts, sit the names of 6 texts into the chat that I'll base next week's sample answers around, and students will give me 6 texts, and I'll write some sample answers to past examination questions that week, record myself writing them, put it up on the platform, and then go through them in the live class. The following week, I'll take 6 different texts just to show you it doesn't matter what text you're doing, it's how you go about writing the essays that really matters. So that's the work that we do with the comparative, loads of stuff. Then you go to the poetry, there's Tracy K. Smith. Let her go. Let's count how many poems. They should all be here, but sometimes I have some of them blanked, but they should be all visible. So let her go to a photojournalist going in. Universe is a House Party, The Searchers, Universe is Primal Scream, the Museum of Obsolescence, It's Not, Joy, Ghazal, The Greatest Person Privation. So you can see what I do is not some poems, but I try to cover pretty much, well, with every poet I've got between 9 and 12 poems by that poet recorded and explained. So a good example would be, I received an email this morning from one of the students of Grinds 360 who's studying T.S. Eliot. And there's a poem on the T.S. Eliot section called Journey of the Magi. Now, I don't teach that poem, and I didn't do a video of it because I've got Eliot thoroughly covered on the platform already. But when the student sent me the email, I replied to her and I said, thank you for your request. I feel that we've got everything we need to know about Eliot on the platform already, but considering the fact that you just asked, I will have a recording and an explanation and analysis of Journey of the Magi on the platform in the next couple of days. And I'll have that up on the platform for Tuesday. So I'll try to make sure that I'm helping you cover your material while showing you that everything is there for you. So there's Elizabeth Bishop, many of you doing. There's The Fish, The Prodigal, and broken up into 2 parts. There are quizzes on the different poems. Filling Station, Sestina, an essay analysis, The Armadillo, In the Waiting Room, Questions of Travel. So again, trying to cover as much as possible. There's Heaney, there's Paul Meehan, and then we go to Macbeth. And again, John Donne should be there as well. I must have skipped over him. But of all 8 poets that are on the course, no matter what poets you're studying, all 8 poets are covered. So I won't cover all 8 in the live classes, but you can go in, you can say, okay, I'm doing John Donne, I'm doing T.S. Eliot, I'm doing Elizabeth Bishop, I'm doing Paul Meehan, whoever you're doing in school, and the material will be there, and there are little videos, and you can watch the analysis and it will help you with your preparation. Then into Macbeth, and there's a breakdown of all of the acts: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5. So a student asked me in the chat before at the beginning of the class, what if you haven't finished Macbeth? If you become a member of Grinds 360, you can finish Macbeth really, really quick because it's all there for you, laid out in simple and accessible form. There's John Donne there. There's Elaine de Quillenon. There's Yeats. So I was wondering where those other poets were, and there they are there. So there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of material for you, including material from classes that I even did last year in terms of paper 1. Okay, and I'm even, if you have any friends that are doing ordinary level English, I'm even beginning to build out the ordinary level English material on the platform too. So that's what English looks like on the platform. That's the live classes. Let me take a couple of minutes now and show you the books. So the book we're looking at now, this is Moria book 2. It's the small book. It's basically a book we put together to give you a taste of the various different aspects of the course and how they're dealt with through the notes and through the books. Okay, so I've got 2 poets in. I've got Macbeth, and what I've got as well is some of the 3 examples of the notes on the comparative, and I'm going to show you those in a second. So if you go in to the book, if you have the book there, I'm sure you've had a flick through it. You can see there's the break. I'm going to go to Heaney now in a couple of minutes. There's the breakdown of the poetry section, the marking scheme, mind map. There's I think 9 Heaney poems analysed, some sample answers on Heaney, which we're going to look through in class. The Heaney mind map, Paul and Meehan then as well. I think it'd be very unlikely that neither Heaney nor Meehan will be on the exam this year. And by the way, you will have people out there who lie to you and tell you they know who's coming up, and you'll have people who tell you, oh, if you just do 2 poets, you'll be fine. I'll never do that. I'll tell you, Paul, we'll talk about what poets I'm preparing this year with my full-time classes in a few minutes. But the simple numbers are, there are 8 poets prescribed. That means that 5 will be examined. That means that the well-prepared student, and that's who I hope you are, somebody who wants to, the reason you're on this call on the 20th of September, miles away from the exam, is because you're hungry and you want to do well. And if you're hungry and you want to do well, that means hard work and not cutting corners. So you try to cover as much material as you possibly can. The fact is that Heaney and Meehan are both Irish, and they both have a good chance of being on the paper because it's very unlikely there won't be an Irish poet on the paper. We'll come to that in a few minutes. So there's the Paul and Meehan stuff again with the mind maps. Then a selection of, a very small selection of the amount of Macbeth material you'll be receiving this year. And what I want to do is get to the comparative, just to show you how it works. Now, many of you will be doing, now by the way, I will drink a lot of coffee during this class, so my apologies in advance. And Tracy, I know you're on holidays, but in case you're here, a special apologies for not using the branded cup. I forgot. But the coffee is good, and that's all that matters. So this is what I mean when I say comparative text. So it doesn't matter what comparative text you're doing, there'll be a document like this for you. So this is small things like these, which I know loads of you will be studying. And the idea is like, it's not like by joining Grinds 360, Paul's going to do your work for you. Paul's just trying to make your work easier for you to do. That's the idea. So you sit down and you're doing small things like these, and you've read the novel. You go, okay, well, I know the story of the novel. You know, I've even watched the movie, which is actually very loyal to the text. But what are the key moments? You know, what's the setting? How do I prepare for general vision and viewpoints? Well, you read the notes. And then every time you're writing about the text, this is your go-to document because it has all of the key moments broken down, has key quotes in it, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of facts about the novel. Not overwhelming amounts. Most of the documents now, if you're doing, for example, Dracula, the Dracula document ended up being like something like 9,000 words because that's also a single text. The same with the Crucible. If you're doing the Crucible or Dracula single texts, the document I've written on the that's Moria, a comparative document for them. I mean, believe me when I tell you, there's everything you need for those texts, whether you're doing them as comparative text or as single texts. But the idea is that this is your go-to document. So you go, okay, I've got to write an essay on using small things like these. I'll go and look through the note, and there's going to be something in there I can use, material in there I can use, key moments analysis I can use. Look at how does the novel end. That's always something that's very interesting when it comes to for example, the general vision and viewpoint and the literary genre of a text, and you can go and read that document. And as I say, there's one of those there's the one on Sive, because I know Sive will be very popular this year, and there's the one on Shawshank. Sorry, somewhere. And there's the one on Shawshank, because I know that those three texts and actually that particular combination will be very, very popular. And then as the year goes on, as I said, you'll see we'll be doing whatever comparative mode, and I'll point to the chat and I'll say, okay, Trevor, pick a year, and Trevor will say, I don't know, 2021, and we'll bring up the 2021 exam paper, and we'll find which modes were on that year. We pick a question, and we'll see if we can improvise or write some answers in response to a past examination question using the notes, so that you're learning the skills that you're going to need on the day. And if you can build those skills, I got a really good question earlier on from August about how do you study for English. You have to know your material, I said, but it's all about thinking about what kinds of questions you could be asked and what are the skills I need to successfully answer those questions in a way that will be rewarded. So that's the first book. And I'm nearly there now, nearly get to the work, but I just want to go and show you. The first book is a inty weensy little book. I think it has, I'll just check. I have a copy of it here myself with my lovely photograph in the front of it. So it's 200 pages. Symmetrical, Dylan. I like that. 200 pages. The second book is, or it's book one, the main book. I know, don't mind me being silly. So this one is still going. And by the way, this doesn't have any of the comparative stuff in it, right? All the comparative stuff will be up on the online, because you're all doing different comparatives. 508 pages. Well, let's say 507, because the last one is just the photographs of me and my colleagues. But 508 pages, and it has everything you want in it. There's all your Macbeth mind maps, all the characters broken down, key moments, key quotes. There's loads of Macbeth analysis, sample answers, looking at different topics in Macbeth. There's your poetry analysis on all the different poets that aren't in the other books. So, the ones I mentioned there, Heaney, Dunn, they're all there. Tracy K. Smith, everything you need. So you can choose which poets you want to do. And that, of course, there will be loads more material thrown up on the platform for you in terms of notes and essays. And then there's tons of stuff on paper one. I have this real obsession with paper one and paper two, as I'm sure you know, are worth the same amount of marks. But because of the huge amount of work required for teachers to get through the paper two material, often the preparation for paper one isn't what it could be. And that's why I give over a full class every week just to paper one analysis. And also there's like 200, but I don't know how many pages of analysis of paper one material, breaking down past examination questions, sample answers, reflections on the qualities of those answers, and then looking at personal writing and what an effective personal essay looks like, speech writing, what an effective speech, short story, narrative writing, all there for you. So this is just an overview of what English is going to provide for you. And I'm not doing too bad on timing. I said 15 minutes. We started at about 4 minutes past, and it's just 20 past now. So that's an overview of the material that you receive for English. And now I want to give you a taste of what a class is like. And I'm going to go straight to work, and I'm going to talk about Seamus Heaney. Now, why am I going to talk about Seamus Heaney? By the way, the mind maps, and I won't turn that page now because you'll have all of those mind maps are in digital form on the platform as well. So if you wanted to download them onto your, like I'm working off my iPad here. If you wanted to little product placement for Apple there, not that they need it. If you wanted to have digital copies so you can use a pen to mark it up, as I'm going to in a minute, that's all there for you as well. Now, so let's get to work. Right, so here's the poets prescribed for study in 2026. Folks, by the way, study poetry is worth 50 marks. And 50 marks out of 400 is absolutely not the most important part of the paper, but it becomes an obsession, this 12.5%. I mean, even when I opened the chat up at the start, the majority of the questions were on poetry. Poetry seems to dominate. But look, here's the thing, right? You have, I know it looks like 10 there, but you'll see a bit of doubling up. You have 8 poets prescribed for study this year. Paul Meehan, Seamus Heaney, Elena Quillinan, and Yeats. They're all Irish. Now, I will confidently say this and hope that I'm not wrong, because it's never been the case where I'm wrong. But I think there's not a snowball's chance in the hottest part of hell that none of the Irish poets will be on your paper. In fact, the reason I can say that, being a bit sneaky, is that it's mathematically certain that one of them will be on your paper, because with 5 poets being examined out of 8, if you have 4 poets covered, then you can say, right, I've got 4 poets covered. That's me covered for poetry, because at least one. And Paul said it's very likely that at least 2 of those poets, sorry, I just want to, there we go. Sanjeev will be looking at that going, Jesus, Paul, would you learn how to use the technology? Sorry, Sanjeev. At least 2 of those will be on your paper. Now, again, is that certain? No. But is it likely? Yes, it is. Now, one of the reasons for that is because there's also 4 female poets. And you will have noticed that that's why Paula Mead's name appears twice, and so does Elena Quillinan. And I'm actually just noticing there that I haven't got her name spelled properly with the follows. And I do in the actual notes, but I didn't do that there. But anyway, so Elena Quillinan and Paula Mead are both prescribed for study this year. And they're both female, and they're both Irish. So they have a really good chance of being on the paper. A really good chance of being on the paper. Tracy K. Smith, Elizabeth Bishop, really good chance as well. If you decided, I'm not going to do the 4 Irish poets, I'm going to do the 4 female poets, you're still covering 2 Irish poets, because you have Mean and you have Nick Quillinan. If you decide, I'm not going to cover the 4 female poets, I'm going to cover the 4 Irish poets, well, you're still sucking diesel, because 2 of the Irish poets are female. So you're in good order. So I'm always asked the question, how many poets would you advise? My name is Paul. My advice is to always have 4 poets prepared. 4, and if you were really somebody who really is very ambitious and wants to do really well and wants to cover all bases, I would have a 5th, and I would do one of the dogs. If there was a poet that I would say this year I'd love to see come up, it's John Donne. I think John Donne has a very good chance of being on this year. Now, he may not be on. Last year, my favourite poet, there's a line up there, my heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing. That's those words, they're up there above Shakespeare's head there. They're written by Gerard Manley Hopkins. Gerard Manley Hopkins was prescribed for study last year, and I was very upset he didn't come up on the paper. But it doesn't matter. If you're prepared and you're not gambling, you'll be fine. We're going to talk about the poetry questions. So the key thing is about Heaney, he's one of the 4 Irish poets. Of the 4 Irish poets that are prescribed on the paper, I would recommend that you do at least 2 of them, and maybe do, if you want to do Heaney and Meehan and Smith and Bishop, you'd be fine. You're very likely to get 2 poets. There's no guarantee. You don't need 3 poets. You don't need 4. You don't need all 5. Although it's very likely that you might get 3, even 4 choices. Okay? So that's important. We know 5 poets will be examined. You know you'll have to write an essay on 1 poet. And we know that the maths says 4 guarantees you a question. Don't fall into the trap of trying to predict who's going to be examined. And particularly don't listen to Billy or Jack on the internet telling you that it's an absolute certainty that poet X or poet Y will come up. What you want to concentrate on is saying, okay, look, I've got 4 poets to cover over the course. So let's do the maths. I'm not very good at maths. October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. Right? So 8 months to my leaving cert. Don't get upset. It's loads of time. Start now. And aim to have 1 poet every 2 months. That's not a huge amount of onerous work, is it? It's only 12.5% of 1 subject, so it doesn't need to become an obsession, but I would start now, and I would start by listening to some of the video content that's there on the platform, and start by looking at some of the past questions and the samples that I'm going to show you today in this class. Now, so this section is worth 50 marks out of the 70 available. And that's out of 400. So, you don't have to spend your life on studied poetry. Now, There's your market scheme, or sorry, the layout of the marks. There you go. And now what I want to do at 25 minutes past is go to my happy place, which is to start thinking about poetry. I absolutely love this stuff. So I apologize if I get a little bit carried away here. There he is, the great Seamus Heaney. Love him, love him, love him. And you can see the breakdown. So there's the Constable Calls. There's the Harvest Bow. And there's a reason why I'm scrolling through these, so please bear with me. The Tolland Man, Mossbawn, Sunlight, Postscript, The Underground, The Forge, A Call, Tate's Avenue, and Bogland. Now let's just do a little count there. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the Heaney poems of the 12 that are prescribed that I've covered. So that's a lot. And do you have to have 10 poems covered? Absolutely not. Should you have, is 3 enough? I know that there are colleagues who would disagree with me on this, but I think as a general rule, no, it's not, because the essay will generally be too short and lack adequate depth. If you're only dealing with 3, do you have to deal with 6? No. Somewhere in the middle. 4 to 5 poems in an essay will demonstrate learning. Now, remember, it's how well you use the knowledge to answer the specifics of the question. If I can give you one insight, if you're thinking about joining us at Grind 360 in these classes, and if you're thinking about joining me as your teacher, I'm never going to tell you lies. I'm never going to tell you if you do this, you're guaranteed to get X grade. But I am going to tell you that if you develop a deep understanding of the material, and then you think about the types of questions you can expect, and you try to form a strategy for answering those questions, you're much more likely to be successful. And that's basically what I do. So that sounds a bit abstract. Let me give you a kind of concrete example of that. Okay. So this is, now you won't have this in front of you. This is the 2025 paper 2. Okay. So have a look. Last year, you had exactly the same breakdown as this year. You had 4 Irish poets, 4 female poets, and 2, I call them the dogs, the dead old greats, but neither Irish nor female. And as I said, very likely that at least 2 Irish poets, at least 2 female poets will come up. So students went in last year and there was a lot of happiness when they saw the paper, because there was a Van Boland. So Van Boland ticks 2 boxes, right? So she's a female poet and she's also Irish. There's Patrick Kavanagh, an Irish poet. There's Elliot, one of the dogs, and that's where my pal Jared Manny Hopkins will knock him up. There's Derek Mahan, Irish, and there's Tracy K. Smith, female. So you think, wow, this is easy peasy. You know, there's you have your 4 Irish poets ready. You would have had 1, 2, 3 choices. There's, if you had female poets, you would have had 1, 2 choices. And if you had covered if you had covered both the dogs, you would have had a choice as well. The issue is the questions are often phrased in a way which can negate the student who understands the poems but hasn't practiced looking at past questions, can find them really tricky. So I'm going to show you the 2, what I would regard as easiest options for last year's exam. This is the Boland question. There's always a reference to the poet's use of language. You have to be aware of that when you're preparing your poetry. Boland's skillful use of evocative imagery. So you know that I was only doing this on last Wednesday with the paper 2 class on Wednesday. And if you joined the platform, you can watch back those classes. I have a really good mind map that looks at the wording of past examination questions. And I was saying to them, okay, and like so I took out 15 phrases like that from past questions, and I put them on a list in front of the students, and I said, okay, how many of those would you struggle with? And I said, put the numbers into the chat, and almost every number came up in the chat. So there was lots of students going, I don't know what that means. So if you're going to deal with, say, for example, Seamus Heaney, and wording like that comes up, what does evocative mean? In what way is Heaney's ability to create that imagery skillful? So what you'll get is students paying lip service to a question. They'd say, oh yes, Seamus is extremely skillful and his imagery is indeed evocative. And then they might even have learned to quote and say, here's a really good example of this. But they don't, their work lacks depth. Their work lacks any, as I said, critical analysis, the ability to explain what Heaney does that makes his work skillful, which results in the imagery being evocative. That's what the top tier of students are able to do, and that's what most other students struggle with. That's why it's so hard to get top tier grades in English. It is, I think, statistically the hardest subject to get a H1 in the Leaving Cert. Now, so there's always a language part. Let's look at the Kavanagh part here, okay? Kavanagh question. This was Kavanagh's discerning use of simple language. Now, you might have Kavanagh ready, but if you don't know what discerning means, you might be in trouble there. If you struggle to think about what makes his language simple, you can't just say his language is simple. You have to explain what's simple about it. Or, as a question was asked earlier on, you can talk about the fact that it appears simple, but it's actually really sophisticated. In other words, you have to engage with that simple element. The Eliot question, the language element, was really easy as well. To say that his imagery, his use of imagery is clever. So you've got to be able to engage with that. What's clever about it? Why do you think that's the case? Give me examples, explain the context of those examples and what makes, and then have you got synonyms in your mind of clever? You know, inventive, original, precise, challenging, thought-provoking. So these are the types of wording that you've got to be able to handle. We're going to come back to the Mahan question when I've done this bit, okay? Tracy K. Smith, I thought this was tricky, but it was a nice enough overall question because it was Smith. Effective use of tone. Now, I'd be happy to be wrong if I've any colleagues on the call here who are watching me to watch me make mistakes and give out to me. I'm more than happy, and I make loads of mistakes. I'm never claimed to be anything other than somebody who really engages with this work. But I think that's the first time they've ever asked specifically about how tone is used to do something in a Leaving Cert question. And it was a little bit tricky. It was a little bit tricky, but the question turned out to be okay. So there's always going to be a language element of the question. So we have skillful use of evocative imagery, discerning use of simple language, clever use of imagery. We'll come to number 4 in a minute, effective use of tone. But then there's also a thematic concerns, or what's the poetry about part of the question. And with Boland, it was pretty straightforward if you knew Boland's poetry. It's about the complex nature of powerlessness. With Kavanagh, it seemed quite nice, and it kind of dragged you in, and you thought, oh, lovely. And then it turned out not to be nice at all. Powerful insights into the world of nature and human nature. And if the question had ended there, it would have been like a scene from a romantic movie at the train station as the two lovers who have been separated for so long meet each other and run towards each other in slow motion. That would have been the question I would have done. Yay! Easy peasy, discerning use of skillful language, insights into the world of nature and of man. But then they decided, let's be mean. And they added this part of the question, drawn from a parochial perspective. If a student understood what parochial meant, and it means to do with like small town life or kind of insular, claustrophobic society where everybody knows everything about everybody else, if that had been aware, if students were aware of that, they could have dealt with it and dismissed it in terms of some of the poems, which again goes back to how you engage with the question. But if you didn't understand that word, you were struggling straight away. The Eliot question, again, I thought it was pretty straightforward if you had Eliot ready. There was another language element. Sorry, I'll just go here. Vivid portrayal as language of a morally bankrupt and futile world. Again, if you know Eliot and you're aware of like Preludes or Rannoch or East Coker 4 or the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, that was fair. It was reasonable. And then Tracy K. Smith, I thought was lovely, thought-provoking in questions about the nature of our lives. I just wish it had said something to do with language rather than tone. That made it slightly tricky, but the thematic element was pretty straightforward. Okay, now, so you can see knowing the poems is one thing, but then your ability to go into the exam and engage with the terms of a question is something else. And that's why I don't recommend that students prepare 2 or 3 poets, no matter how likely it is that you'll be okay. So for example, if you just prepared 3 Irish poets this year, you'll probably have at least one of those poets will come up on the paper. Mathematically speaking, you're pretty unlucky if at least one of those 3 doesn't come up, even if you need 4 to be 100% certain. But what if it's a question like that one and you don't understand what it means? Or what if it's like a question like this Derek Mahon one, which was again, I remember chatting to a good pal of mine and an excellent English teacher. He's actually our history teacher on the platform, Dan Steins. If you're studying history, I could not recommend a better man for you to listen to help you with your studies. But myself and Dan were reading that question. We were both really annoyed. You know, there's no need to put questions that are so abstract on the exam if you want to. This is my strong opinion. The questions should be reasonable because you're really examining the students on a whole load of different qualities: their ability to be purposeful, coherent, to use language in a direct and articulate fashion, to be mechanically accurate. You don't have to write questions like this, which I thought, I mean, don't get me wrong. If I felt like writing a sample essay to this, I absolutely could. But for the vast majority of students, it was really tricky. To what extent do you think an audience's appreciation of both Mahon's language, sorry, no, there we go, and thematic concerns would be enhanced if his poetry was read aloud? Now, folks, just visualize yourself in the exam, right? I remember seeing that question last year, just having this kind of out of body experience where I entered examination halls all over Ireland, and the poor unfortunate students who saw Mahon's name and went, yes, I have Mahon prepared. And then they looked at that question and thought, what the hell? So what's my message? Just because you have a poet prepared and the poet comes up doesn't mean that you're, on a winner. Sometimes there will be questions which will be really quite difficult, and there'll be other questions which will be much easier. So therefore, it's good to have the choice. Just because the poet you love or you find most interesting comes up doesn't mean you answer on that poet. You should always the one thing about the Leaving Cert papers, there's always choice, and you should always pick the question that's easiest, not the poet that you like best. One thing, by the way, to get out of the way is this idea that don't answer on a poet if the poet's going to be popular. Absolute nonsense. Pick the poet whose work you have the deepest understanding of, and the question that on that poet is accessible for you. Don't worry about anybody else, and then do your very best in response to that question. But remember, if you do cut corners, and if you do only prepare 2 or 3 poets, and even if one of them comes up and you have a question like that, you're going to find yourself in trouble. Now, if you're somebody who's going, well, Paul, I'm only looking to get a H4 in English, so, well, then you manage your expectations yourself. I'm always thinking about students. I feel an obligation to give you the best advice to do the very best you possibly could do, and therefore 4 poets or even 5 would be my number. And again, going back to the question that was asked by August, looking at questions like that and thinking about how you'd go about answering them. Now, so how do we do that? Here we go into Seamus Heaney. So remember, all of these poems, recordings of all of these poems will be on the platform. Are on the platform. So I might say to you, okay, next week, we're going to look at the poetry of Seamus Heaney. And I want you, before I see you next Wednesday, to look at the video, which is 15 minutes long, of the Harvest Bow, and say, for example, the video, which is 20 minutes long, of the Tolland Man. Okay? And the expectation will be that I'm not going to go and read every line of the poem because we don't want to. The expectation will be that we've got to go and we're going to look at a question like this one. There's a lot of pages in this book. And then think about how we would go about answering it. And then critically appraise and have a conversation. And I'll show you a sample and I'll tell you why I think it's good. And you might say to me, well, actually, I think it could be improved in this way and that way. And I'll go, instead of me going, well, how very dare you, I'll be delighted because it means you're thinking for yourself. What I've been trying to do all the time is trying to encourage you to learn those skills where you can think for yourself and articulate yourself. So here's a question. I have to admit, it is a nice question. Heaney communicates rich insights into human experience. I'm going to have another sip of my coffee. Using language that is both accessible and appealing. So there you can see your insights into human experience. Do you know what that means? That phrase is not an unusual phrase on the leave insert. So the nature of life, relationships, love, disappointment, ambition, any kind of universal theme. What does rich mean? Rich simply means interesting, rewarding to read, maybe challenging, thought-provoking. You can, once you respond to rich, you can really respond to it in any way you want to, as long as you're engaging with it and demonstrating understanding of what it might mean. And then it says language that's accessible and appealing. And that is a relatively straightforward language wording in a question. Okay? So what I did here was I said, I'm going to write a paragraph, taking a poem by poem approach, which the vast majority of students will do, in which I deal with the poem, The Tolland Man. So let's go back now. Sorry for being annoying. Let's go back now to the poem, The Tolland Man, which is on page 12 of the book. And you will see, I'm not explaining this poem now because the presumption would be that the students would already have watched the video and have some understanding of it. But this is a poem about this guy here, who was the central symbol of the poem. He was a human sacrifice in Iron Age Denmark. And Heaney looks at that picture. He says he wants to go and see the artifact. And by the way, if you do want to see bog bodies, go to the National Museum of Ireland on Kildare Street and you'll see similar bog bodies, because the practice of the killing of human beings and then their bodies being disposed of in the bogs, and those bodies then, unbeknownst to the people at the time, being preserved because of the particular chemical makeup of the bogs. That's something that also happened in Ireland and happened near where Heaney grew up in rural County Derry. So he thinks about this poem. In this poem, he thinks about him, and he thinks about how, for a long, long, long time, we've been killing people in order to try to make the world a better place. That irony, that fallacy, that by killing other human beings, we can make the world a better place. That's what he addresses in this poem. That's what the poem is essentially about. The Tolland Man in the picture was killed as a sacrifice to the harvest goddess. So kill this guy. And by the way, of course, he says in the poem that he speaks an alien tongue, so he's a foreigner. So kill this guy, and it's going to mean that the crops will grow. What a nonsense. And Heaney then uses that to parallel what's going on in his community in the north of Ireland, because he writes the poem during the period of the Troubles, when there was a lot of sectarian violence between Catholics and Protestants and Republicans and Loyalists in the north of Ireland, to highlight the point that 2,000 years may have gone by, but we're still killing other human beings thinking it's going to solve our problems. It's still nonsensical. It's still something which is unnecessary. Okay? And in the poem, he gives us the following lines. Describing, and what I'll always do with you in class is I'll zone in like this on particular lines, particular images. And you might say to me, how many quotes should I learn? Well, as I said in the little chat we had before this class began, it's all about understanding what's going on in the quote, because then it's useful to you. If you don't understand the quote or the language used in the quote, then it's like my shed full of stuff from the middle of the, is it the Lidl or the Aldi central aisle? There's no point in having the tools if you can't use them. So look at this image. Look. So here he is describing a sectarian murder that happened in the north of Ireland in the 1920s, right? So you don't have to tell me the story of the poem. I already know the story of the poem. Here's a particularly striking use of language. The scattered, ambushed flesh of labourers. Now, there's only 6 words, but you've got really vivid, striking imagery there. Really clear. The language is not complicated, but it's precise and carefully chosen. So you've got, first of all, the use of sibilants. That's the repeated S sound. So scattered, ambushed, flesh, and labourers. And that sibilance gives a certain, gives us, first of all, a rhythm. Sibilance, any repeated sound always gives, or I'm just checking the clock, creates a sense of rhythm. But it just heightens the importance of the line, draws our attention to the line, because when we say the line, that repeated S sound makes us focus on the line. It also creates a kind of a haunting atmosphere. And again, that ties into that question on tone that was asked on Tracy K. Smith last year. And then there's that really, really unusual. What he's doing here is he's paying attention to detail by adding adjectives to a noun. What's the noun in that pair of lines? The noun is the word flesh. To describe flesh as ambushed is highly unusual. To describe flesh as scattered is striking, at first initially confusing, and then when you realize what he's actually describing, these men who were tied to the back of a train and pulled along the lines until their bodies were ripped apart, you realize what a shocking and powerful and visceral image that is. That's a man, that's human beings being as cruel as human beings possibly can be. And he's highlighting he will not look away from the violence. He forces us as readers to see the horror of the violence because he wants to challenge us about this aspect of human nature, that we are capable of doing such horrific things to other people and then saying that it's justified because we're protecting our communities. In the last part of this poem, he describes how he would feel if he went out to Jutland, which is the place in Denmark where Tolland is, where Tolland man was found. It's that, a little bit of, not a little bit, Denmark's, there's islands, but there's a peninsula that sits on top of Germany. That's called Jutland. And again, look at the language here. And these are quotes to learn. So you have strength when you go in. He describes the parishes, and don't forget, we think of parishes as being, well, we don't think of them. They are divisions of the church. So we think of Christian ethics and morality and fraternity and love and forgiveness. But he gives us one of Heaney's, and don't forget, this is a calling card of Heaney, this wonderful compound word adjective. It's very unusual. It's a very unusual Heaney poem that doesn't have a compound word. Don't forget what a compound word is. You take 2 words that pre-exist, you put them together either, as one unit, like football. That's a compound word. You had foot and you had ball. Put them together, you got a new word. Or here we have using the hyphen. Heaney always uses the hyphen, man killing. And you get the sense of there's something almost nightmarish about this image. That like the hypocrisies in human nature, that we practice religion, that we have this sense of the spiritual and of ethics, and yet we continue to kill each other. And he thinks about how if he went there to think about the Tolland man, he would feel lost, unhappy, and then this brilliant, brilliant, brilliant juxtaposition. He would feel lost and at home. Now tell me that language is complicated. Just look at those 2 lines, these 2 lines here, right? I will feel lost and at home. So you've got 8 words, and 7 of those words are words of one syllable. 7 of those words are monosyllabic. So his language is not complicated. Remember that the wording of the question on Kavanagh, where it said it was simple? So that is simple, but it's also at the same time sophisticated, because you've got this really clear message. The simplicity of the language is designed to deliver the message with stark clarity. You've got this really clear message, and then you've got this juxtaposition, which is puzzling. How can he feel lost and at home at the same time? Well, here's the answer, and tell me this isn't thought-provoking. He feels at home because this is a place where Tollinman was killed, where irrational, illogical, nonsensical killing took place, where human beings' lives were sacrificed for no good reason. That makes him feel despair. That makes him feel deeply unhappy. That's why he says unhappy. So when he says lost, he means lost as in not knowing what to do. But he feels at home as well, because it was true in that place then, 2,000 years ago, and it's true today. Now, Heaney wrote the poem I think in the 70s, but it was during the Troubles. So we're talking, like, I was born in the 70s, so we're talking the guts of 50 years ago. To you, that's a couple of generations. It's a long time ago. But that is as relevant in 2025. That insight into human nature and our unbelievable capacity for violence and our inability to learn lessons about how violence never solves problems. And that's why the poem addresses universal themes. Now, I'm after spending a bit of time on that. Why? Because I want to go and have a look at the sample paragraph or paragraphs that I wrote in response to this question. And this is the kind of work I do. And I put some sample paragraphs into the book. But again, as I said, if you're with me all year, there'll be, more sample essays, not to rote learn, but to read. Don't forget, if you just read, you're going to be better. You're going to be more informed. You're going to be more articulate. You're going to develop your vocabulary and awareness of language. But also, again, we'll have classes during the year where, somebody will come on and say, Paul, we did an in-house mock exam, and this was the question on Heaney. I didn't have a breeze. I really didn't know what to write. Could you give us an insight? And I'll go off like, okay, that's grand. I'll go off and I'll spend a couple of, some time that week in the intervening week between class A and class B, and I'll draw up a little note and I'll show you some samples and hopefully help you. So it's not like you get the stuff and that's it. This is an organic relationship that we have where I'm going to try and help you as much as I can. So have a look at this analysis. Now here I took an A-B paragraph structure. Again, what we don't want to do is produce, deal with 4 poems, write an opening paragraph, 4 long summaries, and a closing paragraph. That's how not to do it. So what I've done here is I've written 2 paragraphs in response to this question about how Heaney communicates rich insights into human experience using language that is both accessible and appealing. And my goal here is to make sure that my work conforms to the marking scheme. And again, you know what that means. And if you don't know what that means, again, have a look at the first class that I did this year where I broke down the marking scheme. If you're not sure about it, you can ask me in class, but PCLM, we have our marking scheme mind map is there on the first page of the book. I'm not going through it now, but it's there. I have to say, Dylan, I'm liking using the book like this, if you're watching. Where am I gone now? Gone too far. Yeah, there we go. But what I'm always trying to do, I'm always saying to myself, okay, what do I know what I'm writing here? Is it relevant to the question under discussion? Yeah, I'm going to have to stop this now in a second. I have a feeling, Ronan, this will definitely go up to 6:30. So I want to make sure that everything I'm writing is relevant. That the examiner's not reading this saying, okay, what's this got to do with the question? I need to make sure that the examiner, the basic stuff is, you have to show I know me stuff. So I need to demonstrate learning. That's by reference to the poems and quotation from the poems. My work must be informed. It's an English exam. I need to look at my basic things, my punctuation, not to overuse conjunctions, not to write the sentences that are, 6, 7 clauses long and 6, 7 lines long because they're confusing to read. It's like getting a set of instructions that go on forever and your brain explodes. Keep my work nice and tight, properly punctuated, clear. Don't use words I don't understand, but don't lack ambition in the way I express myself either. Build your knowledge of vocabulary, incorporate new words into your work as the year goes on. And remember to contextualize your point in the light of the question. Again, you'll see me talking about the RIC rules as we go through the year. So I've got my 2 quotes and I know what I'm going to write. So let's have a quick look at this. So TM, and I'm allowed to do that if I write the Tolland man down, just like in comparative. If I write the Tolland man down once, and then I put in brackets TM after it, I am allowed then use that abbreviation when I'm talking about the poem in my essay. It's a remarkable poem that offers rich and disturbing insights into the human experience. So there we have, and I know when I read that sentence, okay, well, the student has now moved on to this poem TM, Tolland Man. Okay, so you've made that statement. Let's see what you have to say about it. So you're on the question. In his usual narrative style, demonstrating understanding and learning, because Heaney is a storytelling poet. You meet characters, he brings you to settings. He's very much a storytelling approach to poetry. Heaney draws a straight line between Iron Age Denmark and modern Ireland in which he lives. He describes how the Tolland man was sacrificed in order to appease the god of the harvest, and then goes on to describe the scattered, ambushed flesh of labourers in 20th century Ireland. The language here is accessible and appealing as the sibilance and the detail create a vivid and powerful image. Now, if you were to read that, what would you think? You'd think, okay, well, the student can write. There's no basic errors. They have worked hard. They clearly know the poem very well. They're able to talk about his narrative style. They're able to give an accurate quote. They're able to talk about the god of the harvest. They're able to talk about Iron Age Denmark. They're able to talk about the poet's use of sibilance and attention to detail. But you would also think it's a little bit short, that analysis. There's no development really. There's no real sense of getting under the skin of the poem. And the way most students then fill in that gap is they write the story and they narrate the poem. Or there's a former colleague of mine who I have huge respect for as an English teacher, would always be talking about paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is telling the story. Like, think about it. I don't need you to tell me the story of the poem. I already know the feckin' story of the poem. I'm the teacher. What I'm interested in is, can you demonstrate your knowledge of the poem by reaching into it and picking out things that you think are interesting and relevant to the question? Because just your ability to do that will prove that you've done the work. So this is then the type of commentary that I always want to see. Remember I told you, the thing about doing these classes is, as a teacher, I'm writing samples. You're opening yourself up to what-ifery, but this is my sense of what you need to be doing, engaging with the question and giving a really thoughtful, critical analysis paragraph. The image is thought-provoking and challenging. Why show the reader such brutality? Because Heaney is offering an insight into human behaviour that is perhaps more disturbing than enriching. So see the way it asks about rich insights, and you're dealing with that, but you're saying, do you know what? It is an insight, but it's more disturbing than enriching. Absolutely brilliant. That's the kind of originality where we're not sitting here saying, this is not like mantra stuff. We're not looking for you just to recite off words so we can hear the sounds. We're looking for you to engage in a thoughtful way. He's describing how we still kill, we still commit acts of illogical savagery, and then justify them by claiming we are motivated by the desire to protect our community. See that thinking, that engagement, but also it's very clear that you understand and studied the poem. This message delivered in a subtle and clear style. So subtle means that the choice of references are clever and not immediately obvious, but clear is the language, is startling. The poem forces the reader to think about how little has changed in the 2,000 years since the Tollan man was killed, and forces the reader to think about the violence and savagery that seems to be an inescapable part of human nature. And why am I talking about human nature? Because the question talks about, sorry, God damn it. The question talks about human experience. So the work is engaged with and is relevant to the question under discussion. And across those two paragraphs there, you've got the guts of 180 words on one poem, not summarizing the poem, but demonstrating learning, demonstrating critical thinking, and engagement with the question. Pretty damn good. Now, guys, it is 5 o'clock, just after 5 o'clock. So I'm going to go down now and refill my cup of coffee. I'm going to take 5 minutes and I'm going to ask Grace if you're still awake. Grace, poor Grace, having to listen to me talk about poetry. That's just a taster of the way I deal with the material. It's all question facing. The material is already there in the recorded sessions. So the expectation will be you'll do a little bit of work yourself. And then we come in and we don't waste time and we get questions and we start thinking about them. And just thinking about them, whether you agree or not, that's the key. And why are those boxes there? For reflection for you. So the book is a study aid, not just something that you read, but something that you read and then think about and reflect on. Grace, I'm going to ask you, can you open the chat? When I come back in 5 minutes, I'm going to get it closed again. As in, I didn't realize, Grace, that when it's closed, I won't be able to see any of the questions. But I'll take about 5 minutes of questions, and then we're going to do a bit of Macbeth to show you how I deal with Macbeth, and then we're going to go and go on to another Q&A at the end of the class. So I'm going to mute the call, go and get my coffee. So if you've any observations or questions, lash them in there, and I'll deal with as many of them as I can in 5 minutes. Okay, here we go. This is the part that I'm dreading. Just to say, folks, right? I'm going to try and answer a good few of these questions, but remember, this is a kind of a one-off class where we're just basically trying to show you, what we do. So I'm not going to try to answer every question that every student has here. I do that as you attend my classes throughout the year. So I'll deal with a few of these, and then I'm going to shut it down again and come back to it when I show you a bit of the Macbeth material. So I'll just go up here until I see where admin has it closed. Okay, how many pages to the poetry SAB? Now I need to manage that, don't I? So how many pages to the poetry SAB? Well, this is actually annoying. It keeps on shooting up on me. I'll hold it like that. So depends on the size of your handwriting. You're talking about around 1,000 words. So for most people in the answer booklet, it's going to be between 5 and 5.5 pages of the booklet. Spelling waiver, Juliet, it's complicated, but essentially you're going to get those 10% of marks. Okay, so you don't worry about it. You try to, I've taught many students with spelling waivers, and I'd always say to them, just try to spell the words as accurately as you can, and don't worry about it because you won't be deducted marks when the exam is corrected. There's a mathematical formula added to it, and essentially what it results in is you get your 10% of marks for mechanics. What should I do if I struggle to write multiple pages in an exam situation? Rocco, practice writing paragraphs. Like anything else in life, Rocco, it's an interesting thing that you'd say to me in an exam situation. So is that because of the stresses of dealing with the writing against the clock? The most important thing you do is you have a process, and the only way to get a process is by practicing. You don't start by thinking about an essay. All you do is think of an essay as a series of joined up paragraphs. You get one paragraph done, that's the first step on the stairs, then the next paragraph, then the next paragraph, and write as much as you can within the time limits. And don't get yourself stressed out. Don't get yourself worried. It's an exam. It might not be your strongest subject. It might be that you struggle with the particulars of writing against the clock. Do your best. But for me, the key thing would be paragraphing, practice writing paragraphs. Make sure you don't spend too much time on them. 7 to 9 minutes per paragraph, and you get faster and quicker, and you get your essays written. Is it an ideal answer for the Talon man, or should the answer be longer? Again, James, there's no such thing as an ideal answer. If you demonstrate engagement with the question, can you write about more detail about that poem? Yes, you can. Do you have to? No, you don't. What you have to do is, as I said, be relevant, informed, clear, and contextualize your points, but make sure that you're not substituting critical thinking and question-facing analysis for summary. In poetry, when talking about a certain moment that answers the question, I presume, would you recommend mentioning what happened before this moment? Actually, that's called contextualization. And again, there's no perfect answer to your question. It depends on the point you're making, and it depends on how well you're able to explain the point. But yeah, you'd have to give some context to the point you're making, but the context to the question that you're answering is more important. Jade, every single year, I've been teaching English for 28 years, and every single year, believe me, you're not alone. This is the perennial question for students. How do I broaden my vocabulary? I'd say start using, as I say, technology. Listen to lots of interesting podcasts. I was going to mention this evening because I'm a very boring old man. I was making my son laugh because I was telling him I was very excited. There were tickets being released for a gig on Monday, and I'm going to get myself a ticket for the gig. And he said, "Oh, what is it?" And I said, "The Rest is History are coming to Dublin." And this is a brilliant podcast for old men like me. But actually, that podcast has now started doing a book review podcast. And recently it's done In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, which is an amazing book. And it's also doing Dracula next week, which I'm looking forward to. Listen to a really good podcast like that. Just listening to intelligent people talking about things in a way which is not arch and deliberately confusing. And that's going to broaden your vocabulary. And also read as much as you can. And I know that's not the answer that you wanted to hear. Sophia, again, you have to manage your time. Poetry's worth 12.5% of one subject. So you have to make that decision. You have to look at your schedule. You have to look at where your priorities are. But the fact is that the more questions that you think of across the poets, The more you engage with analysis of questions, the stronger you're going to be when it comes to using that skill on the day of the exam. I don't do predictions, Jack. I've already said that before. As I said, if you look at the 4 female poets, the 4 Irish poets plus 1, you'll be grand. Take any combination you want. And this whole thing about a poet come up last year, so she won't come up this year. She absolutely could. There's plenty of precedent for poets being repeated. No, Jada, I wouldn't say that if you're running out of time near the end, that there are quick ways to pick up marks other than to stop, write a conclusion, and reread what you've just written to make sure that you eliminate any basic errors in phrasing or in spelling. Adding that extra rushed paragraph rarely adds any value to the essay if you've left a mess behind you because you're in a rush. So I would always say, take the time. My advice when it comes to this is it's comes from my former life when I used to be a very young person working in kitchens, and I was always told clean as you go, which meant if you use the pot, wash the pot, put it away before you move on. So when I write a paragraph, I'll always reread the paragraph to check for errors in spelling and particularly in phrasing before I move on. I won't always spot them. You'll see in my notes and my samples in my book, you'll see errors. Errors slip through. It's why editors exist. But the habit of trying to eliminate the ones you do see is certainly a good habit to develop. Ross, if your purpose mark is down in your essays, it's because you're not engaging with the question fully. It's because maybe you're paying lip service to the question or you're over summarizing. Stop and think about how the points you're making are relevant to the question under discussion and explain why that is the case. Deborah's asked a great question. Now, again, I can't answer all of these here and now, but Deborah, that's the kind of work I do. That's a big question about planning essays. It's work I do every week in classes. It's about making sure that you have a through line in your essay, that you know the order of the points you're going to make, but also that you're happy. That's a creative process writing an essay. So you're happy as you go along to take a little diversion as long as you have a plan and let the question be your guide. Purple Hibiscus is a brilliant book, and the note on Purple Hibiscus is there. If it's not visible, let me know. It should be there because it's a note I did a couple of years ago. Purple Hibiscus has been prescribed for study for a little while. I already talked about essay structure and can't have got time for that. Yeah, Barry, I do think that taking the 10 minutes to pick the right question and to have a good think about planning the essay is a very good plan. Timing on paper 1, you've got loads of time. Paper 2, you've got an hour per essay. Writing time should be about 45 minutes once you've done your planning. Dylan, that's entirely up to you. You'll have the notes, you'll have the book, you take the notes down. I'll often be marking up documents. Most students do take notes as they go through the classes. Sophie, again, I wouldn't have anything that pops into my head straight away here. Yeah, if you go on to August again, if you go on to the platform, you'll see there's a document there. I'm always asked to recommend books um, for students to read. Again, I've no idea whether or not reading books will develop your particular vocabulary, but I'm always asked to recommend books, and I have a list of books I recommend that I think are wonderfully written and interesting and accessible for people your age, and that's there on the platform. Tips for students using assistive technology. It shouldn't really make any difference to you in terms of your structure of your essays and stuff. One of the things it can do is result in paragraphs that might be slightly longer. Just be really, really careful to make sure that you're planning, because it's obviously, I know when I'm typing, sometimes I get a bit carried away. Old school examiners. Old school examiners. Katie, there's a very good rule in life. No problem. There's a very good rule in life, Katie, and by the way, you can shut the chat down now, please, Grace. I'll talk about timing, Andy, when I get to the other side of this Macbeth work we're going to do now. Control the controllables. Okay, I as somebody who has corrected the Leaving Cert, and I haven't done it very often because it's unbelievably hard work, and I do this work during the year. But I've corrected it enough times to know how it works, and I've been correcting Leaving Cert essays for thousands of students for the guts of the last 30 years. Control the controllables. Don't be worried about what ifs. What if I get an old school examiner? What if I get whatever that phrase was, a newer examiner? Just make sure your work is purposeful, as coherent as you can make it, written in language which is controlled and as clear, and maybe, with a little bit of sophistication in terms of your expression, and is mechanically accurate. And then you'll be okay. The biggest problem students often have is making sure that their work is purposeful, because that's the bar. Juliet, I'm always looking for a word count of around 1,000 words in terms of essays. Okay, Grace, if you wouldn't mind, you can close that chat now. It is just coming up to 20 past 5. We're going to get into now and talk about a bit of Macbeth. Okay, so let's get to work. I hope you're all finding this in some way useful. And again, these are my opinions, insights. I am not the all-seeing, all-knowing, but I've some experience that hopefully will help you along the way. Okay, Macbeth. Now, again, some of you might not be doing Macbeth as your single text, so this is probably your moment that you're going to switch off. But Macbeth is the single text that I will cover this is on page 85 of the book that you would have received at Higher Options, guys, otherwise known as Book 2. Okay? And Macbeth is the play that the vast majority of students will be taking as their single text this year, for the simple reason that Shakespeare is compulsory at higher level. And a Shakespeare play, it can be very time consuming and take a lot of work. So most teachers tend to do it as a single text, which is why in these classes I will do Macbeth as my single text, and I will do workshops. Actually, something I wanted to mention really quickly. One of you guys, and I presume you're already a member, asked would I do a workshop on Sive soon. The question has been asked. Absolutely 100% I'll do a workshop on Sive. So let me have a look at my schedule, and I'll pop in one of the Saturdays, probably around this time, sometime between 4 and a half, 5 in the next couple of Saturdays over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks, and I'll do a workshop on Sive. Now, Sive is prescribed as a single text for ordinary level, but it's only a comparative text for higher level. So I'll be looking at it in terms of just the overall key moments in the play, key quotes, and then we'll talk a little bit about it as a comparative text. Okay, so let's get to work. So this is the Macbeth section of the shorter book. There's loads more Macbeth stuff in the bigger book, and what I want to do is have a look again, as I keep on saying, think about questions and think about how we answer questions effectively. You go through these and there's a big stream of different types of questions. Discuss the course and nature of the resistance to Macbeth's rule in the play. Kingship, with all of its potential for good and evil, is a major theme of the play Macbeth. Macbeth and his wife drive out pity and remorse from their natures and then find themselves isolated from and confronted by a world that has no pity for them. Discuss this statement. And I think what's always really interesting when it comes to these questions is the word that I always say, okay, what's the most important word in the question? And the word that students rarely answer is the word that's there. Look, there it is there. There it is there. There it is there. See? And this one here, to what extent would you agree, which means discuss. So write your response to the statement, which means discuss. When you're answering a Macbeth essay, and these are the most recent questions that have been asked on Macbeth in the Leaving Cert. The last time it was examined was 2023. I actually corrected the Leaving Cert in 2023, and it was answered quite well, the Macbeth sections in the scripts that I corrected. And the questions were relatively straightforward. And 2019, I also corrected the Leaving Cert in 2019, actually. And I thought that the students in 2019, the questions, they struggled more. So have a look at these 4 questions that have been asked, and I'll give you a little idea of what you need to do when you're looking at your Macbeth preparation. We'll go from bottom to top. So we look at the second question from 2023, which was hugely popular. Shakespeare makes effective use of Lady Macbeth and the witches to heighten the dramatic impact of the play. And then the little proviso, in a variety of ways. Now, that was a great question. Number one job, know your characters. Now, you'll see when I show you the mind maps how straightforward that is. And again, it's work that has to be done slowly and steadily. I was having a bit of crack with the middle child today. We were going home from a match, and I was driving down the road, and I said to her, I went out for a run here this morning, and I started here, and I'm going to tell you when I stopped. And I kept on going, because it was a straight road. And it was only 5 kilometers that I did a jog. It wasn't a run. It was a jog 5. But she was like, oh my God, 5, that's a really long way. And it's really not. Anybody who does any kind of running, 5 kilometers is not a lot. It feels like a lot before you do it, as in before you start practicing. But once you get into doing a bit of running, 5 kilometers is basically really, really straightforward. It's not really difficult thing to do at all. It's the same way with these preparation for these questions. Before you start doing it, it just feels, oh God, it's going to be so hard. It's going to be so difficult. But if you just put the head down and do a bit of practice and build your knowledge, you'll find that you're building strength. And all of a sudden, something that seemed to be quite onerous and something that seemed to be quite challenging is manageable and reasonable. You need to know your characters. Priority is Macbeth's arc, Lady Macbeth's arc, the Witch's arc, and then I would add in, especially for this year, because the last year there was specifically questions on Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, and the Witches. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see a question on some of the minor characters, like Malcolm, like Duncan, like Macduff. I think I would definitely be looking at the mind maps on those characters, and Banquo. The mind maps on those characters, you'll have them, okay? You'll have them if you're a member of the platform. I'll show them to you in a few minutes. So that was a lovely question. Where did students do well? They did well in demonstrating their knowledge of Lady Macbeth's role in the play. They did well in demonstrating their knowledge of the witches. Where did most students struggle? To explain how Shakespeare's use of these characters was effective in heightening the dramatic impact. Most students paid lip service to those phrases and struggled to explain what the dramatic impact of the play was, what that phrase heightened the dramatic impact means, and how Lady Macbeth and the witches contribute to that. So they didn't really understand the question, if you know what I mean. And you're still going to reward knowledge. You're still going to give them, out of 18 for, out of 18 for purpose, because Macbeth is marked out of 60. They might get 11, 12 for demonstrating knowledge of those two characters. But you see those other 6 marks that bring you from, if you like, a H4 to a H2 or a H1. Those other 6 marks are for somebody's ability to discuss the impact and the effect of those characters on the drama. And that's the part that most people struggle with, because they don't have the skills, because they haven't done the critical thinking through the course of the year. The other question that year was on Macbeth's character. It was much less popular, which doesn't surprise me because it was tricky. Macbeth's unstable and tragic identity, my uplift of my coffee, is shaped by a variety of ambiguities and complexities in his character. And I suppose when you read that, I'm sure straight away you can see why people prefer the second question. A lot of people would go into the exam, and we were talking, there was a good few questions about vocabulary. A lot of people would struggle with what that phrase means. And a lot of people would struggle to differentiate between ambiguities and complexities. Now, really, you didn't have to differentiate between them to any, huge extent. The two words are kind of synonymous with each other. There's slight subtle differences between them. But essentially what the question was asking was that Macbeth is a seriously complex character with contradictions in his character. He's a hero who's a tyrant. He's a butcher who is, has a soul. He loves his wife, and yet he abandons his wife. He comes out with the most beautiful philosophical insights, and yet orders the murder of children. So that's the contradictions in his character. Where is he unstable? It shouldn't be too hard. And a lot of people would have struggled with what makes him a tragic hero, but that's a very basic. So those were the 2 questions that were asked in 2023. And this was the question that most people went for. And as I said, did a pretty good job. It was a strong section. It was good knowledge of Macbeth, just dealing with the difference between getting a H4 and getting a H3, 2 and 1 is your ability to demonstrate the knowledge and tie it to the specifics of the question. 2019, I think a lot of students in 2019 just picked the wrong question. The easy question, and it's always the easy question, is the language question. It was question 2. Discuss how Shakespeare's use of language, including imagery, which I thought was really interesting. I love this question. I've written so many sample answers to this question on the different plays that have come up since. What am I doing here? It's on feckin' eraser. Why do they say language including imagery? Well, because they wanted you to understand that they're not just talking about imagery. They were trying to see, could you think about anything else about the language that wasn't just imagery. They were talking about things like use of soliloquies or asides or pathetic fallacy or repetition, allusions. They all feature in the play. And I talk about how the language and imagery plays an important part in developing our understanding of one of the following aspects of the play. And they give you 4 options: themes, characterization, setting, and atmosphere. And of course, the easiest one, you could have gone for any of them and it would have been fine. But for me, if you have your characters prepared and you know your character roles, that was a really, really, really easy question. And again, if we're in Macbeth class, am I doing Macbeth this Wednesday? I think I am on Macbeth this Wednesday. I'm going to get somebody saying, Paul, I don't think that's easy. Tell me how to go about doing that. And bang, off we go. That's where the live classes are. The strength of the live classes is where I can respond when you tell me that there's problems you don't understand. The other question that year, I mean, again, it was I read these questions and I go, did I really have to do that to students? Discuss, by the way, I forgot to say, I'll just do it here. Discuss, 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 discuss. Okay? Like they're looking for you to be thoughtful, to be analytical, to be critical in the way you think. Discuss the reasons why, in your opinion, I don't know who else's opinion it would be, Shakespeare's use of a variety of horrific, bizarre, and unbelievable elements does or does not heighten the tragic intensity of the play. Again, bizarre and unbelievable were interchangeable. A lot of students were struggling. Oh my God, do I have to differentiate between those two? Not really. What were they asking me about? They were asking about the witches. They were asking about the appearance of, Banquo's ghosts. Macbeth talking about rivers of blood. They were asking about the apparitions of the armed head, which always makes me laugh. At the end of the play, Macbeth's is this a dagger I see before me soliloquy. If you knew the play well, it was a easy enough question, but it was that part there, again, that students would have struggled with. And if you notice something? Here is 2019, heightened the tragic intensity of the play. And look at 2023, heighten the dramatic impact of the play. Make the play more interesting. The central point is Shakespeare, and I'm sorry if you disagree, but I'm right and you're wrong. Shakespeare rocks. I love Shakespeare. Look behind me. There he is. And look over there. There he is again. And you see all those books over my shoulder? They're all about I love them. Right? I absolutely love it. I love teaching them. But I know in class it can be feckin'. It's not, teachers, it's hard, you have to get through the material. But it can be really exciting. It can be really interesting. And what the examiner's asking you is like, what is interesting about it? And the question will have a particular twist. So thinking about how we prepare, think about questions. And then think about how you write responses. Now, I'll give you loads of samples on Macbeth this year. None of them are to be learned. I'm not somebody I would never think I am Shakespeare's, a great critic of Shakespeare. I'm a Leaving Cert teacher and I try to show you, give you good guidance. But the most important thing is think about the types of questions and then know your play. So what I'm going to do now is an example of how I would go about doing the work. So again, see this document in front of you, right? I only put Act 1 in the book, just so you could read it and have a look, and we might think, geez, I wouldn't mind having the rest of them. And that's, you get them when you become a member, they're on the platform. So there's each act broken up, little quizzes there, and the key quotes, everything nice and explained, right? But that's only Act 1. And again, as I say, the rest of them, if you become a member. Then there's the analysis of the soliloquies, which is I think a big piece of work to do. I'll be doing that. But what I want to get to is page 109, please, guys. 109. How am I doing for time? Not too bad. Now, this is the kind of work I'll do with you all the time. And you'll probably find it boring, but I know it's effective because it's going to build your knowledge. And then we keep on asking questions. So we're going to look at this document, but before we do, I want to show you something else, okay? So let me just do this. And here, I don't know if I have it here now. I'll have a look and see. Yeah, I do have it. So this is, I just love this document. And I've got one, I do one of these every year with every Shakespeare play, okay? And what I'll do on any given evening is I'll say, how are you? We're doing Macbeth, and people will start crying. And then I'll say to whoever's on the chat, I'll say, come on, pick a year between 1995 and 2025 or 23, and the student will pick the year, and we go in and we'll find a question that's from that year or from a year close to it. And then I'll say to somebody else, okay, pick an act, and they might say Act 1, and we'll go into Act 1. And we'll just start digging into the play. And we just start looking at these key moments and think, okay, well, do you know what that means? You know why that's significant? And I'll explain it a little bit, like for revision. I'm not teaching you the play. I'm not going to be reading the play. And if you need to tighten up your knowledge of the play, watch the video recordings that I've already done for you, in which I explain what happens in each scene. But we go into and say, okay, how does that relate to that question? How would you use that to write a paragraph response? Could that be part of a paragraph? Would you need more? So that know the play document, I think, is very, very, very useful. And actually, it goes along with this document, which I was explaining earlier on, is the mind maps, where I break down, look, there's Lady Macbeth, all the key elements of her character, key quotes associated with her character, helping you revise her, okay? And there is the witches, Banquo, Macduff, Malcolm and Duncan, and the theme of kingship, which I'd love to see come up. Power, I'd love to see a question come up on power, justice, kingship in the play. Would be interesting, because it would reward your knowledge of Macbeth and Malcolm and Duncan. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to show you. Oh, wrong one. Too many documents. So again, I'm just going to have a look through these quotes here and then bring it back and just try to get you thinking about the questions that I've just been looking at a minute ago. And this is, I'm not going to spend long on this. It's 25 to, I'm planning on stopping this kind of teaching part at about 10 to, and then opening up the chat again. And I just, it's Saturday evening. You don't want to spend too much time in my company, I'm sure, but hopefully you're finding this in some way useful. So if you have a look, I think deception is a key theme in Shakespeare's play Macbeth. It really is. Now, again, the old days of the maths need to write an essay which you analyse deception in the play. I think the questions are a little bit more subtle than that now, but there's nothing wrong with preparing themes and concepts and characters, because then you're building your knowledge, and you use that knowledge base to adapt to whatever question comes up. But think about the meaning and significance of each one of these quotes. So this is Duncan in Act 1, Scene 2, sorry. And I'm going to bring this back to I'm going to look at 3 quotes here, explain them, make some notes inside the box. And then I'm going to go back and look at those questions on the previous page, okay? And think about how they might be used. So this is a great quote. I love it. No more, that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interest. Go pronounce his present death, and with his former title greet Macbeth. So it's a brilliant moment in the play. Now I'm going to do a little bit of writing here. Apologies if it's annoying for you, because my handwriting is dreadful. At the best of times, when I'm using the pen, it's even worse. But it's really interesting because it brings up themes to do with loyalty, and betrayal, to do with kingship and power, and to do with service and justice. Duncan appears to be, on the surface, he appears to be a strong king. He has heard that a man who was supposed to have been loyal to him, the Thane of Cawdor, is a traitor. So instead of being loyal, he has betrayed his king. As the king, he has to be seen to act. So he uses his power to punish the traitor by ordering his execution. Go pronounce his present death. So we get this sense of in the world of the play, loyalty is paramount. That means really important, probably more important than any other quality. And if you're disloyal, particularly to your king, that is a heinous crime and is punishable by death. Now, at the same time, we see that Macbeth, he is regarded as being loyal because he did not betray his king. In fact, in the battle against the invaders and against the rebel MacDonald, Macbeth stood strong and defended his king. So he served his king. And in serving that king, he is given his just reward. So while the justice that Cawdor receives is his death because he's a traitor, the justice that Macbeth receives is Cawdor's lands and titles. And the reason that he receives them is because he has served his king. Now, that on its own is a really interesting quote. It's got a lot to do with Duncan's appearance as a strong king, but we also learn that he's a man. Don't forget, he has all the power in the kingdom. This is an absolute monarchy. And he's a man whose bosom interest has been deceived. Bosom interest means he held Cawdor really close. And that means that Duncan is a good man. He's a king who is served loyally by Macbeth, but he's a weak king because he trusts people he shouldn't trust. And that's why that then that quote feeds into the wonderful dramatic irony later on. When we learn that Macbeth, the new Thane of Cawdor, who was also held to Duncan's bosom interest, in other words, utterly trusted by Duncan, is also a traitor. And that heightens the dramatic tension of the play. When we hear the witches tell Macbeth that he's going to be Thane of Cawdor, that foreshadows the chaos to come, because we know that the witches didn't make Macbeth Thane of Cawdor. We know that Duncan did it. Macbeth just wasn't there when Duncan made that announcement, and the witches get to Macbeth before that news comes to Macbeth, so that he believes that they made it happen when they didn't, and that's a lie, that's an illusion, that's them deceiving him. So there's loads going on here, and their ability to be present at this announcement without being seen. They're supernatural powers which allow them to apparate and appear and disappear at will, that allow them to travel through time and space against the laws of nature, that allow them to hover, which means to fly. These are bizarre and unbelievable, yet really do add to the tension and the engagement of the audience with the play. So look, that's one quote. And by the way, there's 100 other things you could say about it. I'm just thinking about those questions. Now, I'm going to come back to the questions in a minute. Have a look at this. This is one of the most famous quotes in the play. It's right up there, top 10 quotes to learn. It's very, very, very unlikely there'll ever be a question on Macbeth, ever a pair of questions on the play Macbeth where you wouldn't be able to use this quote to answer one of those or even both. It's a simple simile. The use of nature imagery, which is something which you see throughout the play, and particularly the use of juxtaposition, which is used in order to develop our understanding of Lady Macbeth's character. She tells her husband, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. I mean, I read those words for the first time in the 1980s. And I remember going, ha ha, that's really clever. And it still is. And it was written, when was Macbeth written? 1603, something like that, 1604, 400 years ago. But think about people you know. Think about the insights into human nature that gives us. People who will pretend to be your friend, pretend to be caring and pretend to be harmless and benign and generous and all those things. But in fact, there's something else there, something dangerous, something threatening. Lady Macbeth is in that line. She seems to be the personification of corruption. She's encouraging her husband. And maybe I talked about allusions. The serpent. The serpent is a recognizable symbol of corruption. It's the central, one of the central figures in Genesis, in the personification or the representation of evil in the world, in the sense of the devil incarnate, with tempts Eve in the story of the fall in Genesis in the Bible. And she's telling him, be the serpent. And that's really unusual because we're not used to hearing people speak like that. We're not used to that kind of. Shakespeare gives us this private access to this conniving, corrupt woman, and we can see the influence she has on her husband. And one of the ambiguities of Macbeth's character is he doing does he do what he does because she makes him? Or does he merely use her support to help him do what he always wants to do? And of course, that is one of the ambiguities of his character, which leads to, I think, Lady Macbeth getting a harsh press and a lot of people not really understanding Macbeth's character as a tragic hero. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. Okay. Again, we could go down that rabbit hole in the weekly classes. But I'm just trying to get you to think. So there's loads going on there. Loads. The imagery, the themes of corruption, the dramatic tension. Is he going to follow her instruction? Will he fake friendship and loyalty to the king in order to strike like a snake when least expected? The foreshadowing again of what's to come when the king, goes to bed and his guards are drugged and Macbeth comes in and kills him. So much going on. And then this, again, very, very simple, easy quote to learn. And, the use of alliteration is particularly striking here. False face must hide what the false heart doth know. That repetition of false, really, really good. And that idea of Macbeth's sense of self-awareness, that he has a false heart. And again, bringing up those themes of loyalty and betrayal. Sorry, now I told you my handwriting is brutal when I'm using the pen. Loyalty and betrayal, bringing up those ideas of corruption. And again, making us think about Macbeth's character, this fallacy that Lady Macbeth makes him do what he does. It's utter nonsense. He makes his own decisions. He knows the consequences of the regicide before he does it. He knows that clearly. He understands the implications, but his ambition is so powerful. And she facilitates him, yes. And she encourages him, yes. She is as culpable as he is. But she doesn't make him do it, because if she does, then he's a weak victim. And he's not a weak victim. He's a tragic hero, aware of the fact that he's going to have to put on a false face. What does that mean? He's going to have to smile and he's going to have to feign or pretend to be loyal. He's going to have to look his king in the face. He's going to have to fawn as all lords do to their lord, all vassals do to their lord. He's going to have to show his devotion to his king, while at the same time, in his false heart, knowing that night he's going to do the terrible thing and commit regicide. So this is the way I teach to play. Again, the back catalogue is the key to unlocking your knowledge. You have to do that work on the bus, wherever we go to school. Go for a walk the dog, go for a run in the gym, put your earpods in and listen to analysis of a key scene for 10 or 15 minutes. Don't try and remember everything. You're not studying it more, yeah. You're exposing yourself to that knowledge just by listening to that back catalogue and watching those little videos. And then in the live classes, and then in the extra video content that will be provided for you. And if we do a few workshops on Macbeth as the year goes on, we can do that as well. We just think about the and then go to questions. Now, I'm conscious of time, but let's, having looked at those three quotes there, we've looked at those three quotes, let's remind ourselves of these questions. Now, ask yourself, just think, any of those quotes that we looked at there, do any of those quotes help us, or sorry, do any of those quotes fit with a description of horrific, bizarre, and unbelievable elements? Now, I'm just going to talk very quickly about the last quote, because it's an easy one to remember. False face must hide what the false heart doth know. It's easy to remember, and it's hard not to spit when you say it because of that F repeated alliteration. Sorry, not the alliteration of the F. False face must hide what the false heart doth know. Right? See that? It's good, isn't it? But I know what it means. And you could definitely argue that that is a horrific insight into Macbeth's character, because he fully understands what he's doing. He is not under any illusion as to the consequences of his crimes. He understands that he's going to have to continue to hold the king's trust so that he can betray the king. And why is that horrific? Well, it shows us that even people who we think we can absolutely, completely and utterly trust can betray us. It shows us that even people like Macbeth, noble people like Macbeth, who understand duty and understand morality, can be corrupted, not from without. Yes, under the influence of the witches, no doubt. Yes, under the influence of Lady Macbeth, absolutely no question, but ultimately from within by his human weakness, which is his vaulting ambition. You can talk about horrific there, no bother whatsoever. When the witches appear in front of Macbeth and they say, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Táin of Lambs, all hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Táin of Cawdor," straight away there's an opportunity to talk about bizarre, because then we're straight away, because we know that Duncan said that the Táin of Cawdor deceived his bosom interest and then go pronounce his present death and with his former title greet Macbeth. How did the witches know that Duncan did that? Were they on stage? Did they were they able to be invisible? Have they got an ability to learn information in a way which is unknown to human beings and our skills and abilities? That's bizarre. Macbeth's reaction to the witches, that's unbelievable, that they can identify a man so strong, a man who, as a warrior, can wade through rivers of blood like Bellona's bridegroom, unseeming another human being from the nape to the chops, and then taking his head off and placing it upon our battlements. A man like that can actually be so weak once you identify his psychological weakness that he's easy to manipulate. There's so much going on there. Look at the second question. Shakespeare's use of language, including imagery. Lady Macbeth said, "Look like the innocent flower, be the serpent under it." Nature imagery, biblical allusions, assimilate, all of those things combine to create a striking moment which offers insights into her manipulative powers, into her cynicism, into her corruption, into her enthusiasm for the crime, into her love for her husband because of her determination to help him achieve his goal. Look at this question. Macbeth's unstable and tragic identity is shaped by a variety of ambiguities and complexities in his character. The fact that he knows that what he's going to do is wrong. The fact that he knows that he should be loyal and he understands duty, and yet he will betray that duty. That is fascinating. Lady Macbeth's quote heightens the dramatic impact of the play by foreshadowing what's to come, by creating anticipation, by creating a sense of suspense about whether or not Macbeth will commit the regicide. Will this great hero fall from the pedestal of hero and be the snake? Foreshadowing what's to come. So much to say. So that's how we deal with Macbeth. And then when you go, and I'll say to you, look, that's what we've done in class. You'll have the video content, and then I'll say, go on off now and read a few samples. And there's some samples in this. Sorry, no. Notes on kingship, loads of stuff for you to read. Notes on how to write effective paragraphs. There's the Rick rules broken down. Somebody was asking about essay management, having a strategy for writing paragraphs, and then samples, and just reading lots of questions and sample responses and reflecting on those responses and asking yourself, okay, did I understand the structure of that paragraph? Did I understand all the words that Paul used in that paragraph? Did I understand that quote? And as you read, you're not trying to study it and learn it off. You're becoming more knowledgeable. And guess what? When you become more knowledgeable, see those questions that, like that 5K or a 10K or a 20K, that seem so daunting and so scary. Suddenly, they're not as daunting and they're not as scary because you're building strength. And the strength comes from the reading. And that's how I will do. And I've got an essay pack on Macbeth with 20, I think, different sample essays, all of which are filled with quotes, filled with analysis. And, if you read them, they're going to help develop your knowledge. So it is now 17:53. I have my daughter and her two friends waiting for me because I'm bringing them to a party. So I'm out of here at the latest by 6:30. So let's hopefully I'll open the chat now, Grace, and there'll be nobody. I'll have bored them all so much that they'll all have left. But now, folks, is your chance to ask me whatever questions you want to ask me on any part of the English course, and I will do my best to answer them. But I'm going to say to you, I'm going to encourage you to try and think about joining us at Grinds 360 as we go through the year, because hopefully it will help you, not just in English, but don't forget, you're not just getting English, you're getting every subject. And that's the key. Okay, thanks, Grace. I'll hold on to this. Okay, I've dealt with that. There's no more questions in there at the moment. Oh, the chat is back open now. Thank you, Grace. So, Johan, I deal with all aspects of paper one, how to approach question A tasks. So, developing understanding of the language genres, persuasive language, language of argument, narrative writing, aesthetic language, personal writing, effective speech writing. Looking at question B tasks, thinking about the way you approach them, what the different elements of the question B tasks, how they're built, how to build answers. And the most important thing, of course, is composition, because as you know, the composing section on paper one is worth 100 marks, which is 25% overall. So throughout the year, there's blocks of classes of 2 to 3 classes where I look at what to do if you're writing a personal essay, what the hallmarks of a really good personal essay are, really good speech, really good short story, discursive essay, and so on. So that's paper one. Are quotes necessary in Macbeth questions? Yes, they are. If you're looking to score above a H5, on a higher level, the expectation is that you will be able to support your answers with quotation. How often do you think comprehension questions should be studied? Jade, a great question. Do you mean in class? I'll do 4 or 5 blocks of it in a year in 6th year, which means 1 week. Again, it's worth 50 marks, but if you combine the question A and question B, that's 100 marks. But again, I've tons and tons and tons of samples. So one of the things I'll encourage you to do is just say, look, there's the 2024 samples. Have a read of them. So again, the practicing of writing the answers is important. That's what your teacher in school will do. I'm not replacing your teacher. I'm simply trying to help, supplement the work you're doing in school. But yeah, regularly enough. Loads of tips for comprehensions, Johan, and that's what I do on the Sunday evening class. In-person workshop for English in a couple of weeks, Barry, in Ronan. If you're on, you might pop it in whatever date that is. I'm out there on a Saturday or Sunday, I think, isn't it, Ronan, in a couple of weeks? It's early October anyway. We'll structure your study for English again. It's too general. It depends on your level. It depends on your what topics you're covering, how far into it you are. It's too broad a question for me to answer on a format like this. So Dylan, I'm not teaching you small things like these. Small things like these is one of the 36 comparative texts under discussion. I have written a very detailed note on small things like these. It's in the book that you may have received at Higher Options. For want of a better terms, that's book 1. And that's there for you to read. When I go to comparative, if there's demand for me to talk about small things like these in relation to certain questions, I will look at them. But I don't do individual classes on individual comparative texts because there's 36 different texts. Thank you, admin. 5th of October. Is that soon? No, Juliet. And for me, that's fascinating. So Juliet is asking about, Shakespeare was writing that play because he had a particular audience, one person, King James, and King James was obsessed. I think the book he wrote was called Demonological, Demon Logica, something like that. But I certainly think I can't think of a question, Juliet, where that's going to be relevant to the specifics of the question. The answer to that question is always, is it relevant to the question? Okay. If it's not relevant to the question, students often they learn things that they think are interesting. This is always happens in poetry essays. They learn like a little bio of the poet, and they start telling me like Tracy K. Smith was born in this place then, and her dad was and her mother was, and I'm going, what's this got to do with the question? So if it's not relevant to the question, don't include it. I'd say, Andy, for me, the time management, and again, this is stuff we do all year. Paper two is very simple: 20 minutes for unseen poetry and an hour per big section. So an hour for study poetry, an hour for your single text, an hour for your comparative. Some teachers would recommend you go minute a mark, so that's the same for single text and unseen poetry, and then 70 minutes for comparative, 50 minutes for poetry. I think that's a bit short. The 45 minutes or so, that's writing time. 50, the full hour picking the question, planning the answer, reviewing your answer. You should be able to get a decent length essay written in 45 to 50 minutes. Isha, no idea when you can book that. So Reese is asking, how many pages are you talking for essay question answers? 30, 40, 50, 60 marks, etc. Thanks very much in advance. No problem. So I will talk about that first of all, Reese. So the 50 and 60, that's your, on paper two, that's your studied poetry and your single text. Those essays will be roughly the same length. Okay, they'll be roughly the same length. The poetry essay is worth 50 because poetry overall is worth 70 more than single text because of your unseen poetry. But you're talking about most, and nobody's going to be counting the words, but a decent length essay is going to be somewhere around 1,000 words, maybe a little bit less than 1,000 words, maybe a little bit more, but a decent length essay with enough meat on the bones, enough detail, enough analysis is going to be around 1,000 words. The 30, 40 ones, that's the breakdown for the part A and part B of the comparative answers. The comparative essays tend to be, because 30, 40 means you're definitely writing about 3 texts, they tend to be a bit longer. But if you're talking, again, that's the work I do. I'll show you sample answers to comparative essays and show you the length. But comparative essays tend to come in combined about 1,200 words if they're done properly. Amy, the answer is, and I'm sorry if I'm not telling you what you want to hear, as many as possible, little and often. Try to make it your target to count how many weeks there are to the exam and add one good quote from Macbeth a week. And my goodness me, you'll have plenty then. And the crucial point will be, no matter what the question is, you'll have choice. We want to have choice. We don't want to be boxing ourselves into a corner, because we've only got 10 quotes and they have to work no matter what comes up. As I keep on saying, my approach is always the same. Like, I get in trouble for saying this, but I don't care. Our education system has become all about the Leaving Cert and not about developing educated people. I want you to be educated people. The English curriculum is fantastic. Whoever designs it and keeps on refreshing it is doing an amazing, I haven't got a clue who they are. They're doing an amazing job. It's rich, it's full of interesting, challenging material. Paper one, language skills. Paper two, the critical analysis of amazing texts. So you're becoming a more educated person. But the more knowledge you have by just constant reading and thinking, the better you'll be. No, it's not possible. I don't think it is possible to buy single subject subscriptions. Is Barbie a good movie to do as a comparative? It's an excellent movie to do as a comparative, and I've got an excellent note on Barbie. It's already there on the platform. I know it's and Precious, a big thing to be aware of, and I think that's interesting. You say Barbie's a lovely movie to do. It's got loads of depth, and if you read the note that I did on it, you might see that. But this often students are a bit suspicious of their teachers' choices. But I'll tell you something now. If any of you, will I say the name of the school? Okay. So if any of you go to Cross and Passion College in Kilcullen, County Kildare, your principal and I are very good friends, and we've been very good friends since we were about 4 years old. And he used to be an English teacher as well. And me and him when we started off teaching English together, we used to do this thing where we'd just randomly pick any 3 texts. Obviously, it had to be only one film, but from the list of texts, randomly pick any 3, because then 20 years ago, it was a truth, and it's still the same truth now, that when you pick a text, Every text works with every other text if you're doing it properly. Barbie's actually, I was delighted to see it on the course, but this year all of the films that are prescribed for study are fascinating. In terms of when you're looking at them under the like through the prism or the lens of the comparative modes. Alex, yes, I have many strategies for answering questions. I've already shown you some of them, but that's work that we do in the regular classes. It's not something I can answer now. Um, that's perfect, no problem. Specific vocabulary, write about poetry. It's really interesting, less descriptive. What you mean is that you're afraid that you're going to be telling the story of the poems. I presume that's what you mean. So, like, understanding the language of poetry, first of all, don't get, even when I see that sentence I just said, see that sentence that I just said there, right? A part of me just stepped out of my body and stood over there and hit me a dig in the head, because I hate that whole English teacher thing where you sound pretentious, and I'm sure I'm failing at that all the time. But I suppose my point is, like, you don't have to be massively knowledgeable about, the technicalities of poetry. Let me show you something really quickly here, if I can find it. Is that it there? Yeah, see this. This is one of the mind maps that you get. It's in the it's on the platform already for members, and it's where I'm breaking down what to expect from poetry essays and the kind of language that the questions use, and then the kind of language that they use on style, and then on thematic content. And what I'm trying to do there is build your kind of knowledge of the types of wording of the questions, and then when we look at the sample answers, you'll see there's kind of phrases I use repeatedly because everybody's doing different poets and so on and so forth. But you don't have to be over. I'm not, I couldn't talk for too long about metrical systems and the difference between one and another. And I have a good knowledge, but you don't have to have that depth of knowledge. You just have to engage with the questions. That's the key thing. Um, Now, okay, Sophie, Mustang. If I've watched it, it's a brilliant, fascinating movie. It has subtitles, and I've got a really good note on Mustang. Again, I'll probably try to bring it up here, and it won't be. It'll be blocked because sometimes I think it's me. I'm accidentally blinding documents, but it should be here. But the point is, if I can find it here now, give me a second. Where's Mustang? There it is. There, right? So look, I've got plenty of details on Mustang there, and that note includes quotation. You don't have to have loads of quotes. In fact, you can write a poet. You can happily write a comparative essay without using quotation. But the fact is, I will always go back to no problem. I will always go back to. I've been in the game a long time, and I'm very lucky that over the years I've worked with. You know that thing where if you're interested in something, you'll always look at people who are good at it, and you just learn from them. I've worked with some amazing English teachers over the years. One of the best is a fella called Martin Kelly. Martin Kelly was a colleague of mine for many years in another school that I worked in, and just a gentleman and a brilliant English teacher. And I remember having this conversation with him. A student had said to me in a grind class, my teacher says you don't have to know quotes for comparative. And Martin at that time was the king of comparative. He was, everybody went to Martin for the comparative. And I was chatting to him, and I said, what do you think of that? And he said, because I would always say use quotation to support the points that you're making as much as you possibly can. And he looked at me and he said very simply, in his gentle, Kerry accent, he said, an answer which is supported by quotation, all other things being equal, is usually superior than an answer that has none. And if Martin Kelly said that, it's good enough for me then, and that would be my approach today. Yeah, and Precious, I suppose the thing is, you have to remember, the examiner, it doesn't matter what, I mean, you have to, if I'm correct in the Leaving Cert, and I'm correct, most examiners will correct about 220 scripts. There will be text that recur quite a lot. So for example, this year, I imagine small things like these will be done a lot, but the combination with there'll be different combinations. So you're not really being examined on Barbie. You're being examined through Barbie. So it's your ability to talk about the general vision of viewpoint or the literary genre or the cultural context and your ability to respond to the question. That's what you're being examined on. But like, don't forget as well, if you're just not happy with your text and you want to switch to another one, if you join us, all the texts are covered. Okay, so I feel like that went okay. Were you happy enough with that, folks? It's 10 past 6 now. I think that we've covered. If my aim today was to give you a sense of what our classes will be like, hopefully you get a sense. I've already got Paul and Mean in the bag. In terms of the analysis of paper 2, I've already looked at speech writing as a mode and started looking at the 2025 paper 1. As I said before, the classes are always within a couple of days, depending on how my fantastic colleague, who's so busy all the time, Thailand, it's usually within 1 or 2 days the recordings of the classes for all your subjects are posted, and you can dip in and watch whatever you want to watch once you remember the platform. Okay, Connor, no, I won't make a video on when to use commas. I'll refer to my friend Dan Steins, who I mentioned earlier on, and the Oxford comma, because I'm sure that's probably what's melting your head when it comes to the comma, because you probably have a teacher. As I always say to Dan, Jesus Christ, your students must be fantastic if that's the level of your concern. Just try to punctuate your work with clarity, Connor, and no examiner is going to decide, oh, this candidate, I was going to give them a H2, but their use of commas doesn't conform with my adherence to the Oxford comma, and therefore I'm going to mark them down. It's not a factor. What matters when it comes to punctuation is that your sentences are clear and easy to read. Syntax is more important than punctuation, but capital letters, full stops, that's the core when you were 5 years old, and it'll be the core when you're 50 years old. No problem. Now that'll do us. Can you use dash in written essays? Oh, let's talk about ChatGPT, Sophie. I can you use dash in written essays? Do you mean like in compound words, like a hyphen? Is that what you mean? Of course you can use hyphens. Do you mean when you're introducing evidence, like before a quote? I definitely wouldn't use it there. That's where you put the comma, and there you go, Connor. Yeah, and I often forget to do it, but there should be a comma before the first quotation mark. Folks, we do live in the world of AI, and I don't know how it's going to impact us in the coming years. But I will tell you this: in the next 9 months, I wouldn't be using it at all, because it ain't going to help you develop. It ain't going to help you improve as a student. The only thing that I use, when I talk to my students about AI, the only thing that I recommend they do is if they do have problems with phrasing. For example, Connor there, if you do have problems with phrasing, take something you've written and type it into ChatGPT exactly as you've written it and give it the following instruction. ChatGPT, can you please parse, P-A-R-S-E, this paragraph for me, adding commentary. And what it will do is it will have a look at what you've written and not rewrite it for you, because that's not helping you. But it will tell you whether or not your punctuation and your phrasing is clear. And then it will ask you, would you like me to give you some suggestions for how this could be more effectively presented, these ideas? And then you can have a look at those suggestions. But certainly don't tell it to do it for you, because you're developing those skills. I will tell you this, one of the most interesting people I've met in my life told me recently that ChatGPT is wrong a lot more often than it's right. And I've been testing that when it comes to its knowledge of poetry and Shakespeare. And I have to tell you, I wouldn't be leaning on it at all. Okay, folks, will that do us? Did you find that useful? I hope you did. Thank you very much for joining. I hope to see some of you as early as tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening we have our paper 1 class, and then on Wednesday we have our paper 2 class. And by the way, It has been requested that I give kind of a rough outline of what I'm planning on doing and the schedule for the year, and that will be on the newsfeed tomorrow. Okay, so I'll say thank you very much, unless there are any more questions, and I hope you found the class in some way useful. And good luck with your. If I don't see you, if you don't join us, good luck with everything. I hope you have a really good year. You have the book. Hopefully, it'll be of use to you. You know, it is a great subject. It's an exam that's not as hard as you might think it is. Lots of thinking, lots of reading, lots of practice. Cheers. Okay, we're done. I'll say good evening, and now I'll go and bring these girls to their party. Bye bye. Have a lovely evening.